Hello, it's Wednesday, January 27th, and this is Student Affairs Live, the online learning community for student affairs educators in higher education. I am your host, Heather Shea Gasser from Michigan State University, and today we are talking about an important and timely topic, gun violence on college campuses, with 4 higher education leaders and contributors to a new book, College in the Crosshairs, An Administrative Perspective on Gun Violence. You can participate in our learning community today by following along live on Twitter and tweeting to the HigherEdLive hashtag. And thanks again to my friend Valerie Reska, who will be monitoring our Student Affairs Live back channel today. Before we get on with the show, I need to recognize our episode sponsors. Student Affairs Live is part of the HigherEdLive network, where free live webcasts allow viewers to share knowledge and participate in discussions about the most important issues in student affairs. You can tune in to Student Affairs Live with my amazing co-host Tony Duty and me this spring every other Wednesday at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. HigherEdLive is produced by M. Stoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. In higher education, the degree is the product. Your program pages are some of the most marketing critical to your website. If you're interested in getting M. Stoner's model to build effective program pages and spending some quality time with one of our experts, check out the link we're about to tweet so you can learn more. Student Affairs Live is also exclusively sponsored by ACPA, College Student Educators International. ACPA's strategic partnership with HigherEdLive calls attention to the pairing of innovative professional development delivery with the strength of a renowned professional association. ACPA is now accepting nominations for the SSAO Advisory Board. Click on the link that we're tweeting out now to nominate yourself or a colleague. So now on with the show. Earlier this month, President Obama announced a series of executive actions that he will take to reduce gun violence in the United States. This is a particularly timely and important topic for our nation's campuses, as gun violence is a potential reality that all colleges and universities face. The new book, College in the Crosshairs, was created out of this recognition that preventing gun violence is an ongoing, evolving, and necessary leadership responsibility. So I'm thrilled today to have the book's 2 editors on the show. Please welcome West Virginia State University President Brian Hemphill. Hi, Brian.
Hello, how you doing?
And University of Mississippi Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs, Dr. Brandi Hephner LaBanc. Hi, Brandi.
Hello, good morning.
And also joining the panel are the co-authors of the book's foreword, Dr. Kevin Kruger, NASPA President. Hi, Kevin.
Hi, good afternoon.
And Dr. Cindi Love, ACPA Executive Director. Hi, Cindi.
Hi, Heather. Thanks for having us.
Welcome to all of you, and thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedules to join us on Student Affairs Live. So we're going to start today by having each of you just give us a brief summary of your background that brought you to this topic. Brian, would you like to start?
Thank you. I'm Brian Hemphill, President of West Virginia State University. My entire career has been in student affairs and enrollment management up until this point. I've had the opportunity to be at a place like the University of Arkansas as Associate Vice Chancellor and Dean of Students, and on to Northern Illinois University, where I also served as Vice President for Student Affairs and Enrollment Management. And this is just a topic that's near and dear to me, but I know that we'll get into some of that in a few minutes. Thank you.
Great, thanks for being here. Kevin.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, Heather. Thank you. I currently serve as the President, CEO of NASPA. I've been doing that for the last 4 years, and some of you may know I've been 21 years at NASPA, but spent the first 17 years of my career in student affairs, working on a variety of campuses. This is a huge public policy issue for NASPA and the higher ed community, and something that we are committed in and we committed to. And you'll hear more about us talking about this, but I think it's a significant issue for those of us who manage student affairs.
Absolutely. Great. Thanks for being here, Kevin.
Thanks.
Cindi.
Hi, I'm Cindi Love, and I'm currently serving as the Executive Director of ACPA, located in Washington, D.C. And I began my career as a faculty member on a private religious college campus and went into corporate America for a number of years and returned to higher ed right before 9/11 on a very large community college system in Texas. And then worked with the Soulforce equality ride going across to college campuses for several years as an advocate, and then came into this position.
Great. Thanks for being here, Cindi. I appreciate it. And Brandi.
Yes, I have spent about almost 20 years in the student affairs profession in higher education, and about 4 years ago I was invited to be the Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs here at the University of Mississippi, and I've had the fortunate privilege to continue to work with Brian as it relates to active shooter and gun violence research, and so we're looking forward to talking about this today.
Great. I really appreciate you all being here. As you can tell, all the folks who are watching live, these are 4 very busy people, so incredible to have you here on the show. So Brian and Brandi, I'm interested about how this topic came together. You know, why did you become interested in gun violence on college and university campuses, and then how did you compile the authors to write this book? So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Now, I'll begin. I will tell you that the topic of gun violence has been something that I've been passionate about for a while in terms of this overall topic, but it became very personal for myself as well as Dr. Hephner LaBanc on February 14th of 2008. We had a lone gunman come onto campus of Northern Illinois University and go into a classroom that had 155 students and open fire. At the end of that mayhem, we had, and I think that changed, I know myself personally as well as Dr. LaBanc forever in terms of how we look at our work. And so since that time, we've been speaking on this topic, we've been writing on this topic in order to help individuals be able to respond and hopefully in some cases prevent this type of violence on the campus.
Brandi?
Yes. So as Brian shared, we had kind of this, you know, major experience that we lived, and so that really did kind of create an opportunity where we felt like we needed to give back to the profession, give back to those that we work with, and what we learned through that process. And we had a previous book that we had edited, Enough is Enough, and then when we kind of worked through that process, which was cathartic in many ways, coming out of that experience, we kind of started to watch the concealed carry progression and what was happening across the United States, and decided that maybe it was time to delve into that a little bit and be more proactive. And so I think that our goal with this was to create a book that wasn't necessarily a political statement, but you know, our mantra through not just the active shooter pieces, but also through the concealed carry pieces, not if, but when. So many states are in the midst of that right now, where they're trying to realize, okay, we're going to have to deal with this on our campus. So we tried to create a resource that was proactive for not just student affairs professionals, but any administrator, and also try to be mindful of the nuances of our campus communities. There's chapters that talk about community colleges or small campuses, but the purpose really was to heighten awareness and to really kind of get folks thinking in a proactive way about student development theory and how our training lends to this conversation, about building healthy communities on campuses, and how to most effectively look at threat assessment in our practices around behavioral intervention.
Great. We have already tweeted out a link to the Amazon page where you can purchase a copy of the book. Can one of you kind of tell me, who do you see as the most likely audience for this, and what purpose do you hope the book serves in the larger literature about gun violence?
I would say probably the primary audience, the likely audience, would be student affairs professionals. But really, I think so many folks, I mean, I've had parents mention to me that they've seen the book and they're thoughtful, you know, feel that it was thoughtful. And so I think that really anybody who's connected to a campus community could find some value in it. I hope legislators read it. But for me, it's about, you know, kind of that old saying of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and that is really kind of the feel of the book, is to be preventative and be thoughtful about the work that we do, and how does that translate to building a healthy community.
Great. So Kevin, in your experience, is the field of student affairs and higher education broadly of one mind regarding guns on campus? So does everybody agree that guns should not be allowed?
Well, not everyone, but I think it's almost of a single mind. I mean, the surveys that have been done, you know, 95% of faculty, 78% of students, it's not a comparable student affairs study, are opposed to guns on campus. I've not been in a room of vice presidents for student affairs where a single person has thought that arming students and faculty is a good idea. And so I think there's a fair amount of consensus on this, although, clearly we're a very diverse profession and an industry, so not everyone would agree. This is both a practical discussion the book exposes, but also it's clearly a political discussion as well. We just published this week with Education Commission of the States of an analysis of all 50 states and what states are doing related to this. And I think we're going to see an increase in the number of states who engage in this legislation related to forcing campuses to allow conceal and carry. Already we have 9 states that allow it, and 21 who expressly prohibit it. But even in those 21 states, about 8 of them allow students to have guns in their cars. So I think the political environment here is getting very is going to run up against what our institutions really think is in their best interest, and so this thing is going to get very politicized as we go forward. It's interesting. Cindi knows that we about a year ago wanted to create a public policy statement that would be signed by all the student affairs associations. And what seemed immediately like a slam dunk, like of course all the associations would engage. Many associations and many folks who represent larger constituencies are afraid to get into the political part of this. ACPA and NASPA have not been. We've been very vocal about our opposition to guns on campus and very public about that. But I think that it gets very tricky when you start saying it, taking a position on this.
Great, Kevin. So where are these conversations taking place? And if you had to guess where differing perspectives come from?
Well, I think the biggest perspective is those who believe that we can prevent future gun violence by lone gunmen or even terrorist acts if we have more people who are armed. And there's a narrative out there that an armed citizenry or armed students and faculty would prevent a future shooting. While there's no real evidence to support that, that is a narrative that continues. And I think it's that idea that if only at Northern Illinois, if only we had that faculty member who had been armed, or 10 students have been armed, and because we can get into the chaos that armed students are going to create in an active shooter situation, but I think that's part of what drives it. And I think it's very appealing for state legislators to sort of say, well, we're going to intercede here and force campuses to be in a position where their residents and their citizens can fight against an active shooter situation.
Yeah. So, Brian, as Kevin just mentioned, according to the data that's presented in the book, there are 21 states that ban concealed weapons on college and university campuses, and 22 states where the decision of whether to permit them is left up to the individual college or university or governance body. Can you offer some examples of campuses that are allowing concealed carry and have created effective policies and procedures to work with that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Well, you have states like Utah, Wisconsin, and Kansas that are allowing conceal and carry, but one of the things that I really like as it relates to Wisconsin and Kansas in terms of those states, that they are allowing the campuses still to post signage and communicate that you are not prohibited, you're not allowed to bring weapons on campus. And so I really appreciate, the past conceal and carry for the campuses. They are still giving the states the university some opportunity to have some level of control. In terms of Mississippi, one of the things that they have conceal and carry, of course, but if students are able to take a certain course, it's my understanding that they are permitted then to conceal and carry and bring weapons on the campus, and we happen to have a resident expert with us as it relates to Mississippi. But the policy that I would mention, or the specific campus that I would encourage people to also take a look at, would be Boise State University. I think they've really done a great job of responding to the legislation around conceal and carry, in that they've been very clear that you are not allowed to bring weapons into the residence halls as well as entertainment venues. But I think their policy goes beyond those two areas. They also speak very clearly about their expectations within their policy, and they talk about not being able to conceal and carry if you've been drinking, the fact that they have weapons screenings on campus, as well as employment expectations in terms of if you're an employee and you're concealing and carrying, and what some of the ramifications would be if you were to act in a situation and it's not a part of your job duty in terms of using that weapon. And so I think that Boise State has a really, really strong policy to look at. But I know that we have someone that has firsthand experience with responding to this from Mississippi.
Brandi?
Thanks, Brian. Yes, what I would share as it relates to our state is that we do have legislation that essentially, depending on how it's interpreted, could be interpreted to allow guns on campus. Our state institutions are governed by one board, and that board actually instituted a policy indicating that guns would not be allowed on campus. And so, there's an interpretation that is favorable right now for us, and we have a state board that's very supportive of that stance for our state institutions. But I think again, this is a very important conversation in our nation right now, and we're watching that very carefully to see how that will change. And frankly, I'm having conversations with our chief of police and others on campus about kind of when it changes and what does that mean for us and what does that look like. And for me, watching Texas right now is going to be the best, I guess, barometer of what's happening and how campuses will respond, because each of those individual state schools are now kind of grappling with how they're going to implement this on their campus to align with their legislation, and I think we all can learn a lot from Texas.
Yeah, definitely. We've had a question from Twitter, so I would like to encourage folks who are watching live today to send us your comments or questions, and this one came in from Jasmarie Sanchez that said, and she said, if students use guns to defend themselves, how do you identify the active shooter if they all have guns?
I will share. I'll share that. So, in talking with our chief of police on our campus about that, that's a big concern for law enforcement. Is when you come into the room, how do you know who's the good guy, who's the bad guy? And actually, the community college. I'm blanking.
Umpqua.
Thank you. There were some students that spoke up about that,
yes,
and I think it was in the Chronicle lately about their concern of I feel like I could have gone there, I had a gun, but I don't know that I would have been the right person in the room. I could have been a target, and I think that's a real risk.
And Brandi, in that case, that student was a military veteran, had training, but knew that by inserting himself into that situation that he would put others at risk and himself at risk by the inability of the police to distinguish in the heat of the moment who is the active shooter and who isn't. And I think that's a great example.
Yeah. And also, I think that the military training piece, I mean, a lot of our law enforcement colleagues will remind us that, they're not necessarily trained in handguns. They're not necessarily trained in civilian interaction. And so we also need to be thoughtful about the training that folks come to the table with.
Mm-hmm. So this is Cindi. I just wanted to say, and I'm from Texas, so I've been sort of deeply engaged in a lot of these conversations that are quite polarized in our state around concealed carry or not. And when you mentioned earlier how you got interested in this work, my interest in this started because my brother was on the UT campus in 1966. And so at that time, our family was really aware that all of our excitement in sending him to this great college, one of the greatest colleges in our state, was really tempered and changed forever by that experience. He was not injured, he was just there. And so part of what I think ACPA and NASPA have tried to reflect since 2009 in all of our public-facing statements about this is that the reality is whatever the decision is and however it gets implemented and however good we are at that or not, the mere presence of guns on campus and the risks that are engendered by having them there create a sense of dis-ease and discomfort and a feeling of not being safe among a percentage of the population. And we think, based on the data, it's a larger percentage that feel unsafe than feel safe. However, we've created this perfect storm now for lobbyists and their political clients around this, in some cases with our own challenges on our campus. And this is a very large economic issue that's being driven politically. And And I think we need a larger coalition throughout higher ed of everyone, faculty, administrators, staff, everyone, to talk about these issues of just this one fact, what does happen if you can't even distinguish who is carrying the gun when you come on the scene.
Yeah. Cindi, what's interesting to me, and you kind of raised this in your comments, is that this is indeed an emotionally charged and very polarized topic. And I personally have participated in a number of campus conversations that have kind of ended up spiraling out of control based on these emotional reactions and fear. So how can we both attend to the emotional nature of this conversation, as well as respecting other people's perspectives, but also have conversations that can move us forward? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, it's probably a whole nother show, but in short order, I think the real challenges we're facing socially, culturally, politically are the complete demise of civility and empathy at the core of those conversations, and our respect for human dignity in those conversations has really been challenged, I think, over the last 50 years by a number of events. And so our job, I think, as student affairs staffers and administrators is to ensure that we actually don't succumb to that as well, and that we're creating the kinds of environments that you describe in your book, where student learning and development, critical thinking, the ability to have empathy and civility are the largest constructs of what we're doing. And I fear that the largest constructs right now are compliance and reporting, which is important, obviously, but doesn't get to the fundamental roots of people being so divided.
Great. So another question from Twitter has come in from Jason Cottrell. Jason asks, does higher ed's fear of politics harm its ability to have a voice in this gun violence conversation?
Absolutely.
Shouldn't it be political, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you can't, Heather, you can't blame a college president who is managing the very complex environment Brian, you find yourself in, state institution presidents in particular, where you have a board and you have an elected board, and so it's a very tricky place to maneuver to ensure that your institution isn't harmed by a political position. So I get the reticence that many presidents feel in speaking out on this. So I think we could be less political and be more vocal about it, though.
I think that you really have to take the temperature of your board, because I think I will tell you, before we started working on the second book, that was the conversation that I did have with a few members of my board to just make sure that we were in a good place. How would I have responded if they said, I think that would be too controversial? I don't know. But I will tell you that one of the things that we have to have the courage to do is step up and communicate about issues that we're passionate about and that are important. And so, one of the things here in our state that I've not been too shy as it relates to my thoughts and feelings around guns on campus and conceal and carry. And, I just think you have to be willing to take a stand on certain issues. And it's different in every state, and you have to make sure that you take the temperature in some cases.
Brian, one other thing, if I could just say, is we also have to take a leadership position in the healing that is essential for campuses after these events occur. One of the deep criticisms of the University of Texas was the administration made a decision not to erect a memorial to the victims of that day until 33 years after the event. And there was a lot of work on trying to get past it and not talk about it. But there is this place where if we don't lead people into healing after the events, then they stick with us and only deepen our sense of alienation and lack of trust.
Yeah, there's lots of roles that student affairs, I think, can play, and that's one of the things that's in our wheelhouse, right?
Yeah.
So, Brandi, in the book, it highlights, obviously, that the majority of deadly violence on college and university campuses is perpetrated using guns. And reporting campus violence statistics is, of course, required under the Clery Act. But can you talk a little bit about the role of student affairs professionals in communicating this, particularly to students, incoming students, their parents, faculty, staff, all of the constituencies and stakeholders?
I mean, I think our role is very important. I mean, we're educators, and what we need to do is prepare students and their families for that transition. Moving out of your home and onto a campus is a different level of vulnerability, and gun violence is part of that. I mean, frankly, we also need to be talking about alcohol and other drugs and sexual assault and suicide, and all those things intersect with this gun violence topic, because that's part of the reason. And when I think about what is our voice in this process and should it be political, I think that does hold us back. But at the same time, we have this background and this expertise to offer about what is the lived experience in the college campus for particularly the traditional 18-year-old first-year student, and the different kind of challenges that they're dealing with, from a cognitive growth perspective, from a moral development perspective, and so we can talk about how prepared are they to make quick decisions in an environment where there might be a lot of alcohol, or there might be a lot of depression and other issues that intersect there. So I think our role is very important, because we need to educate, we need to be forthright about what are the safety concerns on our campus and what are the safety resources on our campus. And then also, what is their role in the community? What can they do? And so that kind of bystander conversation about, the care for one another. Here at the University of Mississippi, we talk all the time about our creed and what our creed means, and it's really about the ethos of our campus and taking good care of one another and being respectful and engaging. But how do students then, we need to teach them how to talk to one another and how to intervene whenever someone is at risk. And then reporting information. And so there's lots of levels of that education, and we have a responsibility in all of that.
Great. Again, I think important that we're a part of those conversations and working together with our students to help understand expectations. Kevin and Cindi, I know as organizations based in Washington, D.C., you have the opportunity to work together to both support national initiatives as well as potentially, maybe not directly influence policy, but at least serve as educators. Can you talk a little bit about how you've worked together to support and stand for higher education student affairs?
Sure. Go ahead, Kevin.
Okay, you're up. I can either.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, we've issued basically, to my knowledge, 4 public-facing statements, starting in 2009, again in 2011, 2014. We jointly participated in the publication that was funded by the JED Foundation, and I know Kevin is very, very active in terms of his both appearances at the Department of Education and within the hearings within Congress, as we have been. But I think, for me, the most important work that we've done together is on this issue. Mm-hmm. We have said we do not think this is in the best interest of students. It does not support student success, and it does not support what we believe in terms of being student educators. And I think that at least has had enough resonance in the field that some people who were very clearly in one camp have at least shifted to the middle to give thought to that, who might not have done so otherwise. Kevin?
Well, I just would reiterate what Cindi said. I remember a conversation, Cindi, you and I had at the airport, and you hadn't even started the job yet, and we kind of mutually agreed this is a place where we should come together, and with one voice, and to try to also to bring our other student affairs associations together with us. So I think that's the publishing of this book together, I think, is another very symbolic example of the unanimity we have on this issue. I think that politics aside now, I think the other, and the book represents an opportunity to do this, but, given where we seem to be heading as a society, I think we also then have to be practical about this as well, not just political. And the practical part is reflected in the book. We're going to probably have to delve into more training for students in campuses where guns are allowed, so that, because most states don't require training to have a permit, we're going to have to step into that void and do things that maybe we hadn't intended to do 5 years ago, and I think doing that together as a student affairs community is going to be really important.
I agree.
Actually relates really well to a question that was just posed again on Twitter by one of our listeners. Again, Jasmarie Sanchez asked, should students who opt to bring a gun on campus attend a special training? And should it be hosted by the school? I think that's the important piece here, is should the institution be responsible for providing that in order to avoid accidents? Any thoughts on?
I'm curious what Brandi, how would you do that? Would you, I mean, is that muddy water for you to delve into that?
It feels very much like muddy water. I mean, it certainly, again, we would want to educate and equip, and it's kind of in our nature, our DNA, to kind of move in that direction and move toward that. But at the same time, you create liability situations for yourself. You know, again, this is, you know, a governmental decision that then is impacting and taking us away from the educational mission that we're kind of conceived to do, and so that's a really, you know, it's certainly something I've thought about. It's very troubling because, you know, you're very conflicted in that space. But again, you want to create a healthy community, you want to create a safe community, and so our approach to that is always education. But it's true. I mean, so many of the concealed carry permit processes don't require training, don't require episodic training or any sort of certification of any sort. I mean, our law enforcement are required to do that, but then yet the civilians would not be. And so there's just a really kind of hypocritical feel to that.
Brian, you kind of alluded to this a little earlier regarding how public colleges and university employees and what our role is in potentially influencing or being prohibited to influence legislation. Can you talk a little bit about how student affairs professionals in states where guns are allowed on campus can work to educate about the negative effects of this legislation? Oh, did we lose Brian? Brian, are you there?
You have to be willing to. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're frozen.
Can you hear me?
You're frozen. I can hear you.
Okay. I think the most important thing is to make sure that we are willing to step forward and engage in the conversation. There was a pretty strong push in West Virginia to have some expansion of the conceal and carry that would include recreation centers, colleges and universities, and a number of other areas. And so as a part of that, I had a conversation with one of my representatives, and they, of course, in many cases, they are making agreements and having conversations with groups that are lobbying for conceal and carry expansion. And so he asked me to reach out and have a conversation with the president of this association. And so one of the things, I had an hour-long conversation, and I would encourage people to not be afraid to have conversations with people on the other side of this issue, because I think you can learn a great deal, and it can inform how you will begin to move forward and respond. And the other thing that I think is important as a student affairs professional, if you're not the person that's going to your state capitol, make sure that you're equipping your president or the legislative staff from the campus with the facts and information that they will need to make sound arguments regarding this issue. Now, in the case of West Virginia, this was a case in which the person said, to be very clearly, I'm willing to live and fight the higher education another year because I want this to pass. And so colleges and universities were taken out of the bill. It passed the state as well. It passed the Senate as well as the House, and the governor vetoed it, which was absolutely lovely. But this is just one of those types of things. You have to be willing to engage in the conversation, and sometimes they can be challenging and difficult conversations. And it turns out that this president of the association happened to be a former student of our university.
Excellent. Brandi, can you talk a little bit about how administrators working in states that allow guns, like well, I know Mississippi is different slightly because of what your policies are on your campus, but how can we create in-house practices that work around and with legislation? And then in the book, it specifically talks about using student development theory to create a culture that prevents campus shootings. So maybe you could kind of bring in some of that literature, which I found to be really interesting.
Okay. Well, first of all, I mean, I think that, again, if you're a campus that is kind of having to adjust your policies and deal with this. I think the best approach is to bring in as many campus voices and constituents, be a part of kind of exploring what is the best policy, how do we implement this, what do we need to put in place. And so as Brian just mentioned, talking to the folks, you need to bring in the folks that are pro-gun and not pro-gun, and have that conversation, be willing to listen to all voices to help inform and develop the best possible policy and strategies for implementation on your campus. So I think that's important. Coalitions with other campuses and understanding what's working and what isn't, and so using your networks to understand those types of things would be important. Again, I do think that the theory piece is so critical to this, and the Chapter 4 really focuses on the ethical and moral development lens, and kind of talks about how the concealed carry qualifications are not a demanding type of thing. And so, how do you prepare students, or how do you, get it? In my case, some of the work that I've done is trying to help my legislative liaisons and folks on campus understand that, okay, if we make this decision, now we're putting guns in the hands of students that may not, again, they may be under the influence of alcohol or other drugs in certain circumstances, they may be suicidal. What are we doing that is kind of standing in the way of student success? And so using that lens, and whether that's kind of coming from that ethical moral development, are they ready to make those big decisions? Are they ready to make a life-changing decision? If they take a gun to class and something occurs, maybe they misread that situation, or maybe they're just jumpy, or whatever the case, that can really go in the wrong direction quickly. And so I think making sure that you're thinking about those things, and also just identity development, psychosocial development, intimate relationships, and how, it's not always just the active shooter, the mass killing things, it's the domestic violence situations, stuff like that. I mean, a lot of this, our campuses, we're dealing with a lot of these issues, and the development, the human development piece that goes on in the 4 or 5 years they're with us is really, it happens all very quickly, and so this is a tough environment to throw guns into, I guess, is the best way to say that. So I think that those lenses help inform. So again, I'm not saying, you can use that as part of that political conversation or that argument to help inform folks. On the flip side, you definitely can use it to help inform your policies and how you might implement concealed carry on your campus.
Hey, Brandi, just one of the things you mentioned, students bringing guns into the classroom, and I've had numerous conversations with faculty about the environment now that where concealed carry is permitted, that the dynamic between a faculty member and their classroom when they're perhaps issuing grades that may not always be A's, and the fear factor that our faculty experiencing right now in this environment. It's not a student affairs issue, but it's a campus-wide issue, and I think we have to be cognizant of the kind of environments we're creating when students are bringing guns into the classroom, and what that means for faculty, as well as it means for our student affairs professionals as well, and what that dynamic looks like if you're working with a student in a disciplinary case or something like that, where the presence of that gun can be very, very challenging for the individual person who's experiencing it in that setting.
Absolutely. Cognitive structural development, again, it's,
Right.
moving from that, right versus wrong to relativism, and they're doing that in the time that they're with us, and
Right.
yeah, where are they at on that spectrum, and what does that mean for that professional or that faculty member?
Yeah.
So we had another question from Twitter, which I think is a great one too, perhaps from more of an enrollment management perspective. So Courtney James asked, I'm interested to know if campuses that allow guns have seen any change in their admissions applications or retention after the policy was implemented, and what are institutions hearing from potential students? And I think this also is reiterated by Jason Cottrell again, who asked about, are we talking to students about what they want? Any of you want to respond to that as far as what do we know about from the data about how this has affected admissions and retention?
I have not seen any study on this, and so someone else may have seen something. Frankly, we need to do more research on all of this. But what I do know is that there is data out there and surveys that have been done that safety is typically number one or number two, particularly in the minds of parents when they're bringing students to campus. So I would have to believe that there'd be some correlation, and if we did such a survey, that we'd see that that is cropping up, and that could become a determining factor for some families. But certainly, I mean, I do think that there's some relevancy there. I just don't know at what level. I haven't seen any research. Have the others?
I'm not.
And I would also add to that I think that one of the pieces that's missing is that you asked the question of are we communicating with prospective students? Are we communicating with students in general around this particular topic? And I think that the fundamental decisions that are being made about allowing guns on campus, and it's not our students. It's about politics. It's not about our students. And I think that that's being lost in the entire equation.
Yeah, this is Cindi. That's really, I think, my point about this. I think our reticence is sometimes leaving the door open for this already highly politicized issue to be leveraged by lobbyists. And in Texas, particularly where the student group is so large that is pro-concealed carry, where we're seeing a lot of support come to those students for this work and actually funded by lobbyists, is something that we really have to pay attention to, because if our message is really muted and the message that's coming from other folks is very, very strong, then we put ourselves at greater risk.
Couldn't agree more, Cindi.
So, Kevin, I'm going to shift slightly to kind of what the media has been often equating gun violence to, which is mental health issues, and that seems to be an often touted statement that these two things are correlated. And the book actually talks about how mental health has only a modest connection to campus violence. So, how do we reconcile these two contrary statements? And then, is there something that we're missing or that we can help kind of inform the media better?
Well, I think what we can help with is sort of, I think making the connection between gun violence and mental health is very tenuous in terms of the research. I think what's important is that we have the resources on campus to support students through the wide range of mental health issues that they bring to us. Let's not further stigmatize students who have mental health issues by making this really kind of, again, tenuous connection to gun violence. I think one of the things we struggle with on campus, whether it be suicide or other depression or other significant issues around mental health, is our challenge really is that so many students who are experiencing these challenges go untreated. They don't seek help. They don't find themselves at the counseling center. I mean, some, significant, 80% of successful campus suicides are students who never saw a counselor on campus. So I think the dialogue really ought to be about how we provide that kind of support both in the campus and in the community itself. And yes, are some of these examples of domestic violence and relationship problems and some of the acts of violence enacted by someone who has a mental health disorder? Sure. But let's not create a causality relationship here where the one doesn't exist. And let's instead focus on really expanding the mental health coverage that we have for students so we don't lose them either to some some dysfunction, drop out of school, and become invisible in our campuses.
Cindi, maybe you saw the Chronicle of Higher Education piece last week. Published a story. We'll tweet out the link here. Published a story that would allow students to carry tasers. It was about a proposal to allow students to carry tasers or stun guns in lieu of firearms as a form of self-protection. Your thoughts on this as a gathering? Everybody's like, this is a great idea.
Can we just focus on peace?
I think if we go deeply under all of this, what the real challenge is that some individuals are trying to suggest that the way that we can help students establish a sense of safety and trust is to give them some form of weapon. And the reality is we don't have any research that suggests that safety increases by arming anybody, whether it's with a taser or a slingshot. We just don't. All we have is evidence that suggests that violence begets violence. And so I think our real work in student affairs is to try, if we can, to sort of roll people back into the kind of critical thinking that I think at one point we had in this country, which was that was not the way you could resolve a conflict within a community effectively. And that started breaking down 50 years ago, the Vietnam War and a number of other instances. And now we have to decide, do we want to try and build something anew? Because as long as we stay in this place, I think lobbyists and other people, whoever sells something that you can buy that you think you can defend yourself with, are going to be able to press upon that issue. I don't think we can get away from it.
Anybody else want to weigh in on the stun gun?
I'll just
Kevin
mention,
already did.
Sorry.
I think
I love it.
Harvard just came out with their Turning the Tide report, and it's interesting because it's very different. It's very separate from this conversation, but it's very relevant. I mean, it's about kind of looking at our admissions processes and moving more toward focused on community service and engagement with community, and it really is trying to push us back. I mean, we're hearing these different dialogues kind of crop up in different ways about moving back to kind of an ethic of care and that do no harm principle, which really guides us in student affairs. And so that's what kind of, came into my mind with the question about enrollment, and then, this, let's just replace it with tasers. It's like, no, let's just take care of one another.
Yeah.
So this is another interesting question, I think relates back to the piece that Kevin was talking about regarding mental health issues. So Cody Cooper asked, in looking at mental health issues that may develop in college, can we truly assess the risk of students who open carry or conceal carry?
I mean, no, because we're not. But the states won't allow, nor are we in a position to do an assessment, a risk assessment of anybody who is going to conceal and carry on campus. So the answer is no. We can provide the appropriate mental health structures and support for our campus community in general, but violence, violence is part of our society, and again, our concern is that by bringing guns on campus, it does exactly as Cindi suggests. It just begets more violence. So no, great question. Wish we could, but no, and it would probably be constitutionally prohibited.
Yeah. So I'm going to move towards final thoughts and resources. This book is a tremendous resource for folks in student affairs and higher education broadly. So for sure want to encourage folks who are watching today to get a copy of the book. But beyond that, love to hear what each of you all would like to recommend folks get for more information about everything from threat assessments to policies. And then any other final thoughts that you would like to share. Brandi, I'm going to start with you this time.
Right. Well, I would start with just making sure you're aware of your own state laws and what they mean for your campus, what are your related campus policies, and then also go further and look at your concealed carry policies within the state. So what does that, if you're asked, if you're in a state where you don't have concealed carry on campus and you're asked to move in that direction, what are you up against? Is it 21 years of age? Is it, is there training? Like, the more kind of barriers in place there will have implications for your campus and will mean different things for different campuses. And then I'll just reiterate what I said before is Texas. Let's watch Texas and let's learn from them and let's be supportive of our colleagues there.
Great. Kevin?
I think they tweeted out that we just came out this week. I mentioned the paper we did on state action, which is up to date. That would be a good resource. I think the other thing is that we need to get into practicalities. Where are students going to lock their guns if they're on campus? What kind of training do we do about active shooter situations that's current? What kind of MOUs do you have with local law enforcement, and your campus law enforcement? All these sort of very practical things are things we also need to dive into. If we're going to live under this situation, we're going to have to be engage in some of these practical realities about how to manage this on campus.
Excellent. Thanks, Kevin. Brian?
Yes, I would say that one of the things I would encourage people to take a look at is the program at the University of Florida. It's called the You Matter, We Care program. It is a program that really is about creating a caring community. And I think that one of the program is about heeding the signs and paying attention to the signs that you see with faculty members, with staff. And I think that if you go back and you look at the vast majority of incidents that we've had across the country, there were so many warning signs, but people ignored them. And so I think it's important, and I would say look at that program because I think it's a great model program. The other thing that I would close with is that it's so important to have a threat assessment team and a functioning threat assessment team. And I say functioning because there are plenty of people out there that have them on paper, but they're not meeting regularly, they're not trained properly, and it's important that you have that in place on your campus. I think that is so critical for really being able to detect issues and respond appropriately.
Great, and the book provides some great resources for how to develop that and some suggestions as well.
Yes.
Cindi, final thoughts and resources?
Well, Brian stole my thunder, but I would add to that I think we really need to dig into what we know about campus climate and the construction of that as a field. And I think for a period of time, some of that got dismissed, and I think we really have to resurrect that and go deeply into that. One study that I would suggest that we look at, the Texas A&M study that they did immediately when this was approved around campus climate and the impact of concealed carry, because I think there are some questions within that are applicable really to a larger group or larger audience around the country before this is ever imposed upon them. Could they evaluate that? And I think it might be helpful, and I suspect Texas A&M would love to share that because they have certainly had to weather a lot going through that process.
So Val has tweeted out as many of these resources as we can, and we're going to also put these up on the website related to this particular episode. Again, I want to thank the four of you for taking time out of your schedules. I know President Hemphill is off to another meeting, so if you need to jump off, I understand. Thank you for your time today. Just a few closing remarks. For those of you who participated in the back channel, absolutely fantastic conversation, so thank you to all of you, and again to my friend Val. This show actually does follow a great episode by Tony Duty from last week with Barbara Lee, who's a law professor at Rutgers, so I would definitely encourage you all to check out that episode as well. Coming up next month, Tony Duty, my co-host, will be talking to Dr. Jennifer Coip, the Executive Director of the National Resource Center on the First Year Experience and Students in Transition, about latest research and trends in this area. And then I'll be back at the end of the month with Dr. Kathy Aubert talking about her new book, Turn the Tide, Rise Above Toxic, Difficult Situations in the Workplace, which is all about workplace conflict. So you can receive reminders about this and all of the other episodes on Student Affairs Live by subscribing to our HigherEdLive newsletter. And you can also browse our archives and subscribe to our iTunes podcast. Lots of ways to get information about our show. So again, my name is Heather Shea Gasser. Thank you for watching, everyone. Thank you to the panelists. Keep learning and make it a great week. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.